Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Every Day is Saturday. My name is Brad Gatto, and I'm actually here by myself today. That's not normal. Normally, I've got my co-host Matt with me, or we've got some other guest. I don't know that I've actually ever recorded an episode completely solo like this. A solo-sode is the word I came up with in my head before I started. So this is unique, a little bit different, but the topic of conversation for today's episode is a personal one. So I thought I would just record it on my own. So what I want to cover today is college. And I know what you're thinking, college. Gosh, that's not a normal topic, a little bit different age demographic than the topics that we normally cover. But what I mean by that is my story as it relates to college, because that story actually extends into today. If you are unfamiliar with my story, I attended a small private college in the Twin Cities area here in Minneapolis, St. Paul area, called Bethel College is what it was called when I went there. It's now a university called Bethel University. And my freshman year at that college was 2001. So 22 years ago. And when I started my freshman year in 2001, I was a youth ministry major, thinking I was going to be a youth pastor for the rest of my life in a paid ministry position. And actually was one of the rare college kids that stuck with my major all the way through college. But I went to Bethel my freshman year. I went there for one semester. And after one semester, I transferred out of Bethel and went to a community college, a small community college in Southeast Iowa called Kirkwood, and got some general education credits out of the way. Now, the story, as I like to tell it to people, is I went to Kirkwood for a year to get some gen eds out of the way because I realized how much I was paying for these general education credits at Bethel at this private Christian institution versus what I could pay at a community college. And since I was paying for the lion's share of my college on my own, 99% of it, I thought, gosh, this seems like a good financial decision to go get my gen eds out of the way and then come back to Bethel. And so that was the big part of that decision. But the other part of the decision wasn't just community college. Of course, there's community colleges absolutely everywhere. I chose a community college in Southeast Iowa, specifically in Iowa City, because that's where my mom lived. And at the time, as a 19-year-old kid, even more importantly, it's where my girlfriend lived, who was attending the University of Iowa. We started dating in high school. She went off to the University of Iowa. I went to Bethel. It's about 300 miles apart, about a 5-hour drive. And so that first semester was a bit rough, trying to maintain a long-distance relationship and realizing that I was paying this much for these general education credits. I decided that this was a good decision because, as we all do, right, we make decisions emotionally and then we justify them logically. Emotion, I miss my girlfriend. Logic, I can save a ton of money by going to Kirkwood for a year. So that's exactly what happened. I transferred in to Kirkwood. A year later, my second semester of my sophomore year, I transferred back to Bethel. And that's where I, quote unquote, finished my time in college. Now, the reason I put that in quotes is because what a lot of people don't know about me is that I walked out of Bethel without a degree. In other words, I didn't graduate. It's not something I've ever been proud of. It's not something that I like to talk about. And it's something that from time to time I use language to get around. Instead of saying, hey, I graduated from Bethel University, I just would always tell people that I attended Bethel. And usually when you tell people that, they don't follow up with, whoa, you attended. Well, did you also graduate? So it's not really a conversation I ever had to get into or I had to have. And funny enough, when I got into the financial services industry in 2006, the place that hired me, the big box firm that hired me, did require a college education, a degree specifically, to get hired there. And I remember telling the person that I interviewed with, who was the final interview, ended up being my future manager at the firm, that I had not yet graduated. And it was kind of a, elbow, wink, wink type situation. Like, we don't really care that much. It's fine. We'll bring you in. And so I walked out of Bethel one class short. One. All I had to do was take one more class and I was a college graduate. Couple of reasons why in that moment I chose not to take that class. One, I walked out in May, right at the end of the year, and the class that I needed to take was a January class, or what Bethel calls J term. It's a quick, short semester, if you will, 3 weeks long. You take one class every day for 3 weeks and just kind of knock it out. And it wasn't offered again until the following January. And I didn't want to wait until then. And being newly married at this point, or coming up on newly married, and trying to kind of start my family life with my wife, decided that the job situation was more important. And kind of always told myself and told my brand new bride at that point in time, I'll go back at some point and I'll finish it and I'll go take that class. And the end of this story, to give you a little bit of kind of the end of the rainbow, I'm doing it right now. I never intended to wait 17 years from the day I walked out of Bethel to go back and take this class. But that's what ended up happening. One thing led to another. I was a youth pastor for a period of time there, for 18 months actually, got into the financial services industry in 2006. Fast forward 17, 18 years later, kids happened, jobs happen, and there's just always excuses to not go back and take that one class. And so the reason that there was this, like the situation that transpired, was that this class did come up. I could have taken the class the January before I graduated, but the class required me to go on a trip. It wasn't just an in-class, classroom class kind of situation. I had to go on a missions trip up to Toronto, Canada for 3 weeks, and I just couldn't afford it because I had to pay for the credit hours and I had to pay for the travel and the trip to Canada. And being, a senior in college at that point in time, putting myself through school, it just wasn't in the budget for me to pay for the credits and also pay for the trip. And as I remember it, and I'm not sure this is exactly how it went down, but as I remember it, I argued with him and tried to get him to make an exception based on my financial situation, and it just didn't happen. For whatever reason, it just didn't happen. And so I always kind of thought, well, who cares? It's just a piece of paper. I went through college. I got the education. I just didn't take a 3-week mission trip to Toronto, Canada, which my major required at that point in time. And so I felt okay about it. So the question is, why am I bringing this up on a podcast? And 2, why now? So I'm going to answer those in reverse order. Okay. So why now? Why 17, 18, whatever years later? And so technically as I record this podcast, technically the semester is not over. The semester ends at the end of May. I'm recording this podcast mid-May. All of my homework is done. All of my requirements are done. I do have one final paper I have left to write. So I'm still technically not a college graduate. I do know what my grade is. I do know I'm going to pass. I do. So it's inevitable at this point, but I guess technically speaking, I'm not a college graduate. But the reason I went back was because, as a lot of you probably know, I wrote a book. Started that process of writing a book, I'm going to say in 2021, I think. Early 2021 is when that process started. It was about 19 months it took me to get that done. And that book was released August of last year. So about 9 months ago. And when that book got released, that project that had been on my plate kind of fell off. And if you know me, you know that I'm always kind of looking for things to do and ways to be better and ways to make fiat better. And so I was thinking, okay, big project of book has fallen off my plate. I should come up with a different project. And decided in that moment that I wanted to go get my certified financial planner designation, the CFP designation. It's the most well-known designation in my industry. I have my opinions on why that is, and, the actual true, educational component of the CFP and how important that is. But I do know that if you Google the top questions to ask your financial advisor, or if you're looking for a financial advisor, what are the things that you should look for? The top 2 answers 10 times out of 10 are make sure they're a fiduciary and make sure that they have their CFP. Well, Fiat as a firm is a fiduciary firm. So check that box, got that one covered. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go back and get this CFP because I want to be able to check that box for the prospective families that are interviewing. And I do believe that by going through the process to get the actual designation that I will learn something. So it'll be good for me. So I start to look into what it takes, how I got to sign up for classes and the timeframes and all this other kind of stuff, and realized very quickly that I couldn't do it because in order to have your CFP, you actually have to have that piece of paper. You have to have a degree. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Okay. So next thing happens, I reach out to Bethel. I'm like, hey, this is who I am. And you can probably find my records. And I need, or I want to come back and finish. Funny enough, my counselor, I don't know that she remembers this. She was actually at Bethel when I was there years and years ago. And she wasn't my counselor back then. In fact, I don't even know if that was her role back then. I think she was just a regular professor and didn't have this counseling title as well. But I recognized her and she was like, gosh, that's a really interesting story. I don't know what to do with you because your major, which was youth ministry, we don't even have anymore. We don't have a youth ministry major. And that class that you missed, we don't have that class anymore. So I don't know how to like help you finish your degree. I don't even know if we can do this. Well, it took a couple months and meeting with the entire board that I don't know exactly how this works. So I could be a little bit off base here, but I think it's like the board that kind of runs the ministry section of Bethel. Maybe it's the board that just runs Bethel. I have no idea. But my name came up at that board and they're trying to figure out what to do with this quote unquote kid who's not a kid anymore. He's 40 years old and been out of college for a long time. So how do we help him? Can we help him? Is there a way for him, being one class short to finish a degree that we don't even have anymore? They figured it out. We'll just put it that way. They figured it out and they said, hey, that class doesn't exist, but here's the class we think you should take. It's in the spirit of what this other class was. And the purpose of the other class and going on the trip was to work in the inner cities and basically learn or work on inner city, intercultural ministry. So they give me this class. It happened to work out by the grace of God. It was Wednesday nights. So I only had to drive up to Bethel once a week because it's about an hour from my house. And I did it from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. every Wednesday night. And my last class was last Wednesday. And now it's finals week at Bethel, and I just got to finish this final. So they figured out what to do. And I'm going to now get my degree at 40 years old. By the time the degree actually comes, I'll be 41 years old. So at 41 years old, I will officially be a college graduate. And the reason that I wanted to bring this up is because there's multiple reasons. Number one, it's not a story that I like to tell. That's not a part of my life or my personal story that I'm proud of. The fact that I walked out of college one class short and I let that go for 17, 18 years. I'm not particularly proud of that. I didn't run around and tell people that was a part of my story. And so I just wanted to get it out there. Two, in a lot of ways, and I know this doesn't sound humble because it's probably not humble. That's why it probably doesn't sound humble. I'm proud of the fact that I did it. I'm proud of the fact that at 40 years old, going to be 41 probably by the time this episode airs, that I was able to go back and get it done. My wife supported me. Obviously, anytime that you take addition, you own an organization, run an organization like I do, your calendar's pretty tight anyway. So the fact that my wife put up with me being gone, driving an hour to class, being in class for 3 hours, and then driving an hour home every week, and all the homework that I had to do during the week on top of the normal schedule was a blessing as well. But I learned a lot in this process. And so the second reason I wanted to do this episode was to talk a little bit about what I learned. And I think life experiences are really important and a lot can be drawn from them. Hopefully wisdom can come from them. And part of the reason that we wanted to do this podcast was to try to impart some level of wisdom and fun, right, on our listeners. And so I just wanted to give you a couple of the lessons that came out of my time in this class. Because make no mistake, you guys, this was an undergraduate level course. So it wasn't me, and a bunch of other adults going back and getting their degrees at night or something like that. It wasn't a graduate level or a PhD level course. It was me and I'll say 28 other students between the ages of 18 and 21. In fact, one of the first weeks in class, I'm pretty sure the first week I showed up, most of the class thought I was the professor. Obviously, I was not. But I remember talking to one of the students, and we were doing like icebreaker type conversations. The professor was trying to get some of the students to know each other, and I was talking to one of my classmates, and it had something to do with like, one of the memories that's going to define your college, your time in college or something like that. And when I gave my answer was 9/11, because my freshman year of college was the year that 9/11 happened, the year that the Twin Towers went down. I'd been in Bethel for a week because it happened in September, obviously. And then that happened, and it's something that's seared into my brain. And as I'm telling this story to this other student, this normal college age student, he was wide-eyed. And I thought it was just because I was doing a really good job telling the story, but he was wide-eyed because he proceeded to tell me after I got done telling the story that he wasn't even alive when 9/11 happened. So that gives you a little bit of context. But it was actually a big blessing for me to sit in that class for the last 4 months and be surrounded by 18 to 21, 22-year-old young adults and have to slow down to do this. The class was a ministry class because that was what my major was in. The name of the class was, I'm going to butcher this, I think it was Principles and Methods of Intercultural Leadership. And at Bethel, they call it a Z-tag, and that's just a fancy way to say there's community engagement or community involvement expected, which just means I have to volunteer. So I don't just have to go to class and do what the class requires. There's these volunteer hours as well. And we specifically for this class, we're volunteering at the Vietnamese social services in St. Paul. So I had to spend time there, at least 25 hours throughout the semester, and then find a project to help them with. And so that was one of the big blessings for me is I live in a suburb of the Twin Cities. I live way west of the Twin Cities, and it is most of the stereotypes of a suburb. And so inner city stuff, I'm very rarely involved in or get to be a part of. And those are, the inner city and the things that go on in the inner city and a lot of the things that we see on the news these days, it's very easy to judge sitting in the burbs and judge what's going on in those parts of the cities and in those cultures and things of that nature. And so to be forced into action, so to speak, into one of those settings was really good for me. And the people I met were amazing. It was a very fun experience. And my project ended up being, I got to build kind of a financial education 101 presentation for these families and these refugees. Simple blocking and tackling things like how banks work in America and why we can trust banks for the most part, what a credit score is and how that works, what credit cards are and the pros and cons of them and kind of the tripwires of credit cards. I mean, just all this kind of stuff, the type of bank accounts you should have, why you should shop banks, things like this. So I felt really good about that. It was very fun to deliver that content and then to be able to leave that presentation with VSS. And I genuinely hope that it's useful to them and future clients of theirs, refugees coming into the country. And so that was a pretty cool experience. So that was number one, kind of cool experience that I had. Number two, being able to sit in a class with young adults like that and see kind of what's going on in the colleges these days, being a 40-year-old man and kind of hearing a lot about the education system. And from afar, of course, you can make a lot of judgments and you can have concerns and all that kind of stuff. But very inquiring young minds in that class, very open to education, met a lot of really cool young adults in that class. And it was just very encouraging to me to be a part of that and to work through a lot of the conversations that were being had in that class with people that are much younger than me. They're younger than a lot of the students that I have been a youth leader for over the years. And so just very interesting and a blessing in a lot of ways. And last but not least, it checked a box. In life, when you think about your financial life and to kind of tie this all in, when you think about the whole purpose of money isn't to have money, right? We don't save money just to have a bunch of money. We save it for a specific purpose or for a specific outcome. And a lot of what we tend to spend our money on is things that form or shape our identity and that we draw meaning from in life. And I know that's just super, I don't know, maybe it sounds hokey to some of you, but I do believe in my heart of hearts that every single human being on this planet desires to be seen. And I also believe that every single human being on this planet desires to feel like they belong. And in a lot of ways, money shapes a lot of that for us. And so as a financial advisor, we delve into these types of conversations a lot with the families that we serve. And so from an identity perspective, being able to say that I'm a college grad now, that I didn't give up, that I was willing to swallow pride, because frankly, it was very hard to walk in there and embarrassing in a lot of ways to walk in there at 40 years old and sit down with these young adults who are half of my age or less and take this class. The dose of humility was really good. It was really good for me, and it was very meaningful. I found a lot of value in it. And so it stretched me in a lot of ways. I was very uncomfortable. But like most things in life, when you make yourself uncomfortable and you do something that you put your mind to, it could be something like going back to college at 40 years old. It could be like, I'm not a runner, but I'm going to run a half marathon. It could be anything like that, where the process to get to the end result, everything I've gone through to now hopefully get this diploma in a couple of weeks, which I'm pretty confident I'm going to get. But everything you have to go through to get that process, or if you're going to run a half marathon, you haven't ran in years and you go out there and train to do it. I mean, the process to get to the point where you can run 13.1 miles, that's painful. But man, is it rewarding in the end. And so it's just one of those deals where I just want to encourage every single one of you that as a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are nearing retirement or they're in retirement. And even if you're not, whatever phase of life you're in, challenge yourself. Find something every single day that there's a challenge for you to do that stretches you, not only stretches you physically, but it stretches you emotionally, it stretches you intellectually. It's those types of things that help you find meaning and identity in life. It's those types of things that will keep you young, so to speak. When you talk to these centurions, these people that reach the age of 100, a lot of the advice that they give of how they were able to make it to age 100 has a lot to do with this type of stuff. I'm nowhere near the age of 100, but at 40 years old, I can truly say that a experience I never expected to have at 40, a class that I was not excited to take when they told me the class that I had to take, the amount of work that it involved because of all the classroom work and all of the extracurricular volunteering work that had to be done for that class, in spite of having a wife and 2 kids and their schedules and owning a business and that schedule. It was painful at times to make it happen. It was a stretch. It was all of those things. But here I get to sit and admit to you, number one, I've never been a college graduate in my entire life, and still technically, as of the recording of this episode, am not. But on the other hand, I also get to tell you that I had a very rewarding experience, and it wasn't without pain, and it wasn't without sacrifice, and it wasn't without all of those things, but it was because of those things that I now have this kind of new sense, or revived sense, I guess I would say, because I think it's something we've all felt in life before, of meaning and purpose. And I'm super happy to have gone through it. So a little bit of a different episode for you today, but I also believe for the families that we work with at Fiat, that the best thing we could possibly do for the families that we work with is not just interact with them in a transactional way where they come in here, they visit with us about their money, and then they leave and then they go away. If we know each other on a deeper level, I think that that's only going to enhance the relationship and the experience with our firm, and we can only serve you better. And so as we go along here at Fiat, this podcast will be an opportunity from time to time for us to share with you some of the things and the inner workings that are going on. And this was a big one for me, and the experience has taught me a lot. And I just wanted to be able to share that with all of you. So thanks for indulging me by allowing me to steal an episode to talk about this story. It's not something that I need to be celebrated for. So, if you're listening to this, you do not need to reach out and tell me congratulations or anything like that. I deserved congratulations 18 years ago, but never finished it then. I'm just checking a box that probably should have been checked a long time ago. But it does encourage me and the other advisors in the office here to have conversations of what are the dreams that you have and what are the things that you want to accomplish, because money is a conduit to a lot of that. And we just want to make sure that those things happen. So thanks for indulging me and listening to this episode. We'll be back on a more normal schedule with a more normal type of episode in a couple of weeks. If you're new to the podcast, every day is Saturday, please go back and listen to previous episodes. It is much more normal type education on financial concepts and things of that nature. But and Matt will be back with me on the next episode. Until then, if you have not yet subscribed to this podcast, we'd ask that you do so. We would love for you to know when we've got new episodes coming out, which are every other Wednesday. Feel free to share with your friends and family. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Every Day is Saturday, and we will see all of you next Saturday.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.